Hello, this is Joseph Noecker with the Center for Self-Balance. We are back again to talk about something that you wouldn't necessarily put these two things together very often, because they're kind of, a lot of the stuff I talk about, the ego stuff, you're not going to be too surprised with that. But the other stuff, you wouldn't necessarily put these two together, but we're going to today because I find that it's good to be able to put physical, when we're talking about deep internal psychological, emotional types of concepts inside, that I find because we were really not trained to kind of live in that world. We were trained to live in a physical world, that I find that it's really useful to use physical references and visual references to help us to connect to what's going on inside. So today, with all that being said, today we're going to talk about hoarding. So hoarding is getting a lot of play, and I would say I don't remember really seeing anything about a hoarding show before 6 or 8 years ago. And since then it's been talked about, and it's really in the psychological and the psychotherapy world, and it is being studied, it's being learned about more, we're learning more and more and more about it. But we're not going to go into all that today, but we are going to talk about, we are probably going to talk about that indirectly, but we're not going to talk about all the specifics of it. But we are going to talk about how our minds sort of mimic what hoarding actually is. But we may not do it in an external world, but we might do it in our internal world. So let's talk about hoarding. So hoarding at its nature, and it's more complicated than this, but we're going to simplify. I love simplifying things a little bit. So hoarding is about bringing things into oftentimes your home or a home that are not needed things, not necessary things, and they don't seem to find their way out. And sometimes they don't even find their way out of the container that they're in. So many times the objects that are brought in that are hoarded don't really serve any, what we would call a purpose, a physical purpose, a functional purpose in the outer world. But they're there, so they are serving sort of in some way an internal purpose, or they wouldn't be there. Everybody sort of with me there? Like if they weren't serving something on the inside, even though all misguided, nothing would ever come into the house and just stop right there. So, but if you think about hoarding in relation to our psyche and kind of the way the ego does like to operate. So the ego works on the premise of, like we've talked about, comparing, contrasting, accumulating, repeating over and over and over again, attaches stories to things, thinks that my happiness is going to be controlled from something from the outside, that I'm going to be able to fix this if I have something. If only people will be nice to me, I'll get better. If only everybody starts loving me like I love everybody, the world would be so much better. That would be great. That's it. That's part of the external. The hoarding is, I'm going to feel better once I buy this. This is going to make me feel good. This is going to, and it may not go as far as it's going to change my life, it's going to make me feel better if I bring this in. And whether I'm shopping on Amazon or I'm bringing stuff in or I'm going to yard sales, it's all accumulation. So the ego does a very similar thing as to what a hoarder does. So the ego will bring in things, and oftentimes the things that we're thinking about and feeling about are oftentimes things that have been repeated over and over and over again. And if we're honest with ourselves, and a lot of research is pointing this out, that our thoughts are not original at all. We think the same thoughts upwards of, I may be off on this, but I want to, something in me is saying 80 to 90% of our thoughts are not original thoughts. So they are repeating thoughts that just keep going around. And we keep bringing them in, and then we keep repeating them. And usually they have something to do with fulfilling a function, but they're not really fulfilling anything. It's like me trying to grab a sandwich out of the air. It's like, oh, that looks good. What happened? Oh, that looks where did it go? That's a little bit like, it's like there's no nutrition in the thoughts. There's no nutrition. there's no internal benefit with the packages. But that doesn't change the motion if I don't interrupt and stop to question what it is going on up here. Why the doorbell's ringing again for the 4th time today with an Amazon package? Wait a minute. What am I ordering here? And put it in my hand and bring this into the physical world so I can address this. And I'm certainly not saying it's this easy to do. I'm using that as an example. It's a much more complex than that. But at the root, that's what we're going to get down to. We're going to get down to whether it's the hoarder or a mental hoarder, like all of us at certain times. It's going to come down to us becoming more conscious, more present with what this external thing is serving us. So in the hoarder's world, it has to do with the packages. In the internal, us and our self-awareness journeys, it's going to have to do with redundant thoughts that don't make me feel very good. That's the ding-dong, Amazon. That's our ding-dong. Wait a minute. Where's this package coming from? Haven't I seen this package before? I already have 4 toasters. I've already thought this thought 16 times. Wait a minute. And I slow the process down. This is where tools, and we'll spend a whole session talking about lots of different tools that we can use to slow the mind down. But the key point, you can have the best tools in the world to do this. Meditation and mindfulness and cognitive behavioral techniques, and you could think of all kinds of things. But the key is I got to have the motivation to do it. I have to have the motivation and the commitment to go, okay, I'm done with the repetitive thoughts that are not bringing me peace. Now, does it mean that I'm instantly going to get rid of them? No, we're complicated. There's a lot more to it than that. However, I'm going to make a commitment that I'm not going to add to this anymore. So I'm going to stay with this committed so that no more packages are coming in, no more redundant thoughts are coming in, so that I can be present to get a handle on clearing the space. Because if I don't have a clear space, just like I don't in my house, and if I don't up here, what do I feel? Have you ever watched those shows? Don't you kind of cringe? Don't the people look kind of trapped in their own houses? Don't they look trapped? We go through that in our minds when we're doing that. We feel trapped. So those feelings of trapped and loneliness and anxious that we don't know what to do are very much tied to this idea of the ego being able to bring things in but doesn't know how to get rid of them. So we want to really focus on that. We want to slow the process down so that we can start to see what's happening up there. That begins the process. Thank you so much for stopping in. This is Joseph Noecker with the Center for Self-Balance. See you next time.